Hey, folks. Welcome to Spooky Appalachia. This week's story, we have a special guest on. It's Joe from our friends over there at Wild and Weird. Hey, Joe, how are you doing?
Hey, what's going on, man? Thanks for having me.
This is your first time on the channel. I know Ron's been on a couple times. Brandon's been on before. But, yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's cool to finally get a chance to make it on here. I'm going to share with your listeners about my first encounter that I had with a possible Sasquatch.
Sounds awesome. Well, whenever you want to get into it.
All right. Well, I actually have all of this written down. So,
Oh, okay.
For any of your listeners who, when you're listening to the story and you're hearing specific details, it's because as soon as I had this experience, I was big in journaling and writing things down in this time period of my life, and I still do that to a degree, especially when it comes to research. But back in September of 2001, I was going out and just taking a look at an area where I'd spent tons of time. I grew up out in the forest, and the little town that this was in was called Hernshaw, West Virginia. And the area that I was going to was adjacent to our property where we lived. We had several acres, and it was all mountainside. The mountain behind us was owned by a timber company. And for anybody who's not familiar with how timber companies operate in the mountains, they only timber 1/4 of the mountain at a time, because if they took the entire mountain, it would cause serious land erosion issues and landslides and things like that. They want to be able to resell this property eventually, so they don't want to completely destroy it. So at any given time during this mountain's life, it is cut clean, or it can be, about 15, 20 years old. So the specific area that I was going to was just over the other side of our property. And I was able to get into a natural tree blind because it was made of mountain laurels. And the mountain laurels grow in areas where, the tree canopy opens up and you have sunlight hitting the forest floor. The area was really dense and thick on my side because our end wasn't timbered. But just across this small mountain stream, there was just barren land that had been cut about 5 to 6 years previously. So you had young saplings that were growing, but mostly undergrowth. So it was a lot of blackberries, a lot of vegetation, things that make for good food. And those kind of areas are really good if you're a hunter. And I was going to go scout that area the same as I did every year and just look to see what was out and about, because in September, the only thing that's in season was squirrel season. So I wasn't prepared to hunt for anything. I had a 22 rifle with me, but that was it. And when I got close to my spot, I noticed something large and black. And I thought, oh, cool, here's a bear. I'm going to get over here into my little spot in the mountain laurels, and I'm going to sit and watch it. And when I got into place, I quickly realized that what I was looking at was not a bear. I was looking at a small juvenile Bigfoot, for lack of any better term. If you think about how children play, now being a father and having 2 toddlers, it reminded me of my kid. Very human. It was playing in the open and doing these really terrible half-done cartwheels. Like if you put your hands down on the ground and just kind of fling your lower half around, that's kind of how it was moving and
That's how I
jumping.
still do them.
Right? right? I mean, I have to do them that way. I'm not flexible enough. And but it was throwing its arms up in the air and playing. It was just playing. And then I looked off to the right and I noticed above it, closer to the tree line, there was a very, very large object, creature. And it was setting down on its haunches and it was using its right hand to smack and drag across an old left behind tree that was left to rot. And timber companies will do that from time to time, especially if it's a tree that's already got rot present. They're not going to haul it out of the woods. They're just going to leave it where it falls. And this thing, knowing what I know now, was probably looking for grubs or some kind of an insect that's breaking down the tree matter. It's those trees as they decay, they're full of insects, from termites to isopods, different funguses growing in and on them. So I'm assuming it was going after food. Now, the other one was about roughly 50 feet, between 30 and 50 feet. I know that that's kind of a large breadth, but from my position and at the angle, it was really hard to determine the distance between those two. But the other one was down, and it was kind of setting on the back of its legs, like with its just the front parts of its feet on the ground, and it was digging in the dirt. It looked like it was digging for roots. And I recognized what that was doing because I'd seen bear do that. I'd seen other things, just digging at the soil to get some kind of food. Now I'm watching all of this happen, and I go back to being kind of fixated on the little one and what it was doing. And I know that this story, it seems long and drawn out here, but this took just a matter of seconds, at most 20 to 35 seconds. And so I'm sitting here and observing these creatures, and I don't remember breathing when this is happening. Like you're just stunned. You're in awe of what you're seeing. Then something happened. The wind shifted. The wind blew against my back. And as a hunter, I knew I was made. I knew that at that moment, my position was given up. Maybe not my exact location, but the fact that I was there, I was going to get made. And the biggest one that was up near the tree line, it stands up, and again, back to knowing what I know now, probably made an inaudible sound, some kind of a frequency that was too low for me to hear, but was obviously audible for the other two. And they both stopped immediately what they were doing and started walking towards the big one. The three then walked off very slowly and very quietly into the tree line that was the older section of that timber cut. And I sat there and waited. And in September, there's a lot of foliage still on the trees. And I waited till I could no longer see them before I even thought I was going to move, because I was worried. I was like, what if these things come after me? I do not stand a chance at all. So I waited, and once I couldn't see or hear anything, I turned around and went back to my four-wheeler at the top of the hill and rode it back down to the house. And I did not go back out to that area for a little over a year. I actually waited until December of the following year to go, and I waited until we had a lot of snowfall. I wanted to make sure that all the leaves were off the trees so that I could see into the forest. And I wanted to make sure that if there was anything that was not white as the driven snow, that I was going to see it. So I took some extra precautions there and made sure the environment was right and that the weather was right. And I went out, and from that point, I took some measuring devices, and I wanted to know how big these things were, because after I had my sighting, I went back to the house and got on the computer and I started looking, because these were the old days of like Angel Fire,
Yeah, I had a couple Angel Fire sites,
Yeah, and
Dragon Ball Z sites.
yeah, well, this was the Bigfoot forums, and it's still around. The Bigfoot forums is actually still around, and they're active today. And you know, coincidentally, uh, the West Virginia High Strangeness Collective, which is the team that we founded over at Wild and Weird, we were the Bigfooters of the year for 2022 for the Bigfoot forums, which
Oh,
is
I
really
remember that.
so anyway, I got onto the forum and I started looking at all these like reports, you know, because I went to, I think it was I can't remember offhand, but I think it was like Ask Jeeves. And I went on there and I started typing in like, you know, big, because I knew what Bigfoot was. I grew up watching the Sci-Fi Channel and
Yeah.
seeing the old reruns of sightings and whatnot, and In Search Of. So I found that website, looked up, and I was pretty well convinced at that time that what I had seen was a Bigfoot. So I did take out some measuring devices, went out and walked out the area where this thing was, and I was at most at any given time during this, um, from the small one, I was only about 30 yards, and from the biggest one, I was within 50 yards. So I was fairly close to these things, unobstructed view. And I went and measured on a stump because the biggest one, when it walked back through the tree line, there was a tree that had been cut down. And, you know, watching that thing walk away was burned into my brain. And I walked up to that stump and measured the stump against my leg and with the tape that I took with me as well. But the stump where I stood hit me about mid thigh. And as the creature walked by, it was under its knee. So this thing was probably about 7.5 feet tall, 7 to 7.5 foot. That's my guess. And then the one that was smaller than it, was probably in the 6.5 foot range. So fairly large, fairly very, very broad. And then, you know, I went on and I tried to rationalize this. I didn't tell anybody about this for years. I tried telling my neighbor, and you know, he was like, "Oh yeah, okay." Just kind of blew it off. And I knew nobody at school was going to believe it, and nobody was really into that kind of stuff back then at the school. You know, it was okay to be interested in UFOs and ghosts, but Bigfoot was just a little bit much. Um, so I didn't really tell anybody. Then I went in the military and I continued to not tell anybody except for one guy who kind of, I heard him talking about his experience. And so I opened up and spoke with him about mine. But I had a top secret security clearance, and I couldn't risk having anybody thinking that I was crazy and losing my job and my clearance. Then I became a minister when I got out of the military, and the last thing you're going to do is start talking to your congregation about Bigfoot. You know, like it just doesn't. How are you going to bring that one up? You know, and then again, credibility at that point. You lose credibility with your congregants, and you don't want that. You gotta have a certain relationship. And I wound up stepping away from leadership in the church about 5 years ago. And but I had told Ron and I had started working together years and years and years ago. We had shared some crazy stories, and then I finally told him about my story. And about some other weird things that had happened as well. And time goes on, and we wound up starting Wild and Weird West Virginia, and started the West Virginia High Strangeness Collective. And then we started Wild and Weird Radio. Now it's this Wild and Weird empire where everything has wild and weird something tied to it. and it's a good time. It's it actually, my grandmother even opened up, and I'll tell you a real quick story. Um,
Okay.
a real quick story from my grandmother. This one isn't very long, but when she found out, because I did go on Finding Bigfoot back in 2021, and I was on the Search Continues episode, and I got to be friends with all those guys. And when my grandmother found out about that, that's when she confided in me an experience that she had had. And mind you, this woman like was there for my entire life. I spent a lot of weekends and weeks at my grandparents. They just lived a few miles down the road, so I was always there at least 3 times a week eating dinner anyway. um, so she never told me this story, but she said, well, now that I know that like you're for real and you're not just out, you're like you're really doing this and not just having fun with it or whatever. She said that when she was it was in the 90s, early 90s, and it was when computers first started really becoming like a household item, you know so she was going to the community college there in town and taking free keyboarding classes, because at that up to that point it was very rare for anybody to have a home computer,
Yeah.
and they were wanting to get a home computer. My grandfather was an engineer and he could definitely use it, and she wanted to start learning how to do some clerical work. So she was taking keyboarding classes and like introduction to computers. So she was on her way home, and it was around 8:30 at night. And now this is during the summer, so 8:30 at night means the sun is still up. It's just dusk at that point, right? Probably really similar to what you're seeing in the video at the moment as you're watching
Yep.
this. It's about that kind of lighting. And she's driving up this mountain that has switchbacks. And for anybody that doesn't know what a switchback is, it's when you're going up a mountain and you're not going up around it in a spiral, but you're going up and then you make a turn back on yourself so tight that you can almost kiss your own butt. And you
There's
do this on repeat until you get to the top of the mountain.
a lot of those around here.
Yeah. So she was going up one of those, and there was this one retaining wall that was, if you go measure it, because I've gone to this area and I actually put a tape on the wall. The wall is 14, almost 14 and a half feet. And it's just a retaining wall holding up the side of the mountain. And it's the big concrete blocks, not the little retaining blocks you use for your home. These are like, 4x8 slabs of concrete. So she said this thing came up, she saw an arm come up, grab a hold of the guardrail, and then pull its body up, stepped over the guardrail, took 2 steps across the road, reached up above its head and grabbed the top of the retaining wall, and in one fluid motion went up the retaining wall.
Wow.
And by the time that she had made it around the switchback, which this retaining wall is on the switchback, like it's right where that U-turn starts. And so by the time that she had made it around the turn to look back up the mountain, this thing was already going up the hill and was out of sight. And she can mimic the way it was moving. She drew it out for me and everything. And like, I'm 100% convinced that she saw a Bigfoot. So that was really cool. And for anybody who's out there listening, you may have had some kind of a strange experience. You might not be able to rationalize what you saw or come to grips with it, but you're not alone. There's other people that might even be in your family or your workplace who've had similar, if not the same experience as you. They're just worried about the stigma that comes along with talking about it. So share your story. If by sharing your story that just makes it too much for you, maybe suggest this podcast or Wild and Weird Radio to your friend or to your family member. Let them listen to it and then start the conversation. So what'd you think about that show? What'd you think about this? And then maybe share your experience then. See if they'll open up. You never know.
It happened with me.
Yeah.
My family just found out about it a couple months ago.
Oh, really? How did they
Yeah.
respond?
How they respond?
Yeah.
A lot better than I thought.
Yeah. See, guys, it's not that scary. It's
No.
not that bad.
I was pretty scared about it, but they took it a lot better than I thought. It's crazy considering how long I've done this,
Right.
No, it actually showed up for my dad in his suggested videos. He was looking up something about where the town he grew up in, and I had a UFO story from it.
Oh, wow.
It came up on YouTube. He's like, "Whoa, that's Jimmy."
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny. He called me up and he was playing the video over the phone. I was like, "Uh oh."
He was like, "Son, is this you?"
Yeah, he said, "Why does this have 370 views?"
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, those were some great stories too, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, man. Glad I was able to share them with you guys.
I'm glad you were finally able to come on after all this time.
I know.
I think I had Ron and Brandon on. Gosh, I think that was back in 2022.
Oh,
And
wow.
then Ron was on at the end of the year or the beginning of the year. I forget.
I think he was on, I think, at the beginning of this year.
Okay.
When you guys started that weird, spooky.
Yeah, I forget the name of it. The spooky weird weekend, I think it is.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's it. But maybe we'll have another one with this one. We'll see if my buddy Jared gets better.
Yeah, man, just whenever you run it, buddy. And then everybody who's listening, go check out Wild and Weird Radio.
Oh, yes. I was going to say that, but yeah.
If you want to hear more stories like the one that I shared with you tonight, along with chunks of our research data, as well as a litany of other wild and weird topics, check out Wild and Weird Radio. All you got to do is go to YouTube, type in your browser Wild and Weird WV. It's going to bring you to your channel, and go ahead and mash that like and subscribe button for us and watch to your heart's content.
And if you can't find it, no worries. I share these guys out all the time. You're bound to see it coming from my channel or Facebook page.
Well, thanks, man.
And big thanks to Joe for coming on and telling us this story. Definitely go check them out on Wild and Weird. Look them up on YouTube. There will be a link in the description. And if you've had an encounter like this one you'd like to send us, type it up and send it to spookyappalachia@gmail.com. And thank you for tuning in.